With that, we come to the essentials of India's space program. We shall not delve into two important facets associated with the space sector, namely the militarization of space and the new space phenomenon, that is, the commercialization of the space sector. But first, let us get an idea of the organizations which are steering India's forays in this sector. Firstly, the Department of Space and ISRO. The Indian Space Research Organization ISRO is India's national space agency, as you all know, headquartered in Bangalore. It operates under the Department of Space, ISRO under Department of Space, which is directly overseen by the Prime Minister. ISRO is the primary agency in India to perform tasks related to space-based applications, space exploration, and development of related technologies. It is one of the 6 government space agencies in the world which possess full launch capabilities, deploy cryogenic engine, launch extraterrestrial missions, and operate large fleets of artificial satellites. A look at its history, the Indian National Committee for Space Research, also called INCOSPAR, was established under the Department of Atomic Energy in 1962. INCOSPAR grew and became ISRO in 1969 within the Department of Atomic Energy. Then 3 years later, in 1972, the Government of India set up a Space Commission and the Department of Space, bringing ISRO under the Department of Space. Since then, it has been managed by the Department of Space, which governs various other institutions in India in the domain of astronomy and space technology. ISRO is one of the largest space agencies in the world. It has completed 111 spacecraft missions, that means satellites, etc., 80 launch missions, and has placed in orbit 342 foreign satellites from 34 countries so far. These figures are a little big, but these are taken off the ISRO slide, ISRO's website. ISRO's launch systems have earned the reputation of being among the most reliable and cost-effective solutions in the world. Now I'll talk of 3 agencies which have to do with commercial aspects. Antariksh, it is also sometimes Antrix people call it, but Antariksh is the right. NSIL, the New Space India Limited, and IN-SPACe. So these are 3 which have been established for boosting the commercialization of space, which we will see. Let's look at the organizations first. Antrix Corporation Limited, Bangalore, is a wholly owned Government of India enterprise under the administrative control of the Department of Space. It was set up in 1992 as the marketing arm of ISRO for commercial exploitation of space products and transfer of technologies developed by ISRO. Another major objective was to facilitate the development of space-related industrial capabilities in India. Antariksh is engaged in providing space products and services to international customers worldwide. That is where the real focus is. Provides end-to-end solutions for many of the space products, ranging from simple subsystems to complex spacecraft, space-related services including remote sensing data service, transponder D service for communications, launch services, mission support services including establishment of ground infrastructure, and a host of consultancy and training services. Now, in the last couple of years, 2 more organized establishments have been set up, the NSIL and the IN-SPACe. This part of the transformation process which is going on at the moment. NSIL was set up by the Department of Space in March 2019. It aims to boost the growth of Indian industry by taking up more technologically advanced space-related work. Its charter is to empower the industry in India. It facilitates transfer of technology from ISRO to the industry, provision of launch services for customer satellites, manufacture of SSLVs in collaboration with the private sector, also production of PSLV through industry, and production and marketing of space-based services. I saw a recent news item where it is wanting to take over the control management of the current communication and remote sensing satellites. In general, while Antariksh will facilitate ISRO's commercial deals with foreign customers, NSIL, since both are into commercial aspects, so Antariksh will focus on foreign customers and NSIL will handle capacity building of local industry for space manufacturing. Coming to IN-SPACe, which is short for Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. So this is a center as compared to the other 2, Antariksh and NSIL, which are actually public sector undertakings. InSpace is an independent nodal agency under the Department of Space, establishment of which was announced as recently as June 2020, less than a year ago. It is meant to act as a facilitator and regulator for non-governmental private entities, NGPs as they are called. A licensing, authorization and supervisory regime for space activities has been put in place through InSpace. This is also required via the Outer Space Treaty, which was ratified by India in 1982. In addition, there are a number of establishments which provide mission support infrastructure, different services for satellite missions. Some of the major ones are the Satish Dhawan. Now, basically, you might like to read these. These are indicated here. Some of them are autonomous bodies and others are not autonomous. So, there are a large number, but I'll just highlight some of them. Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota in Andhra Pradesh is the only spaceport of India. The Master Control Facility at Hassan in Karnataka and Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh monitor and control all communication and navigation satellites. This one in Bhopal, MCF in Bhopal, is now under control of the armed forces, as we shall come to a little later. The National Remote Sensing Center at Hyderabad manages remote sensing satellites, all of them, including dissemination of its data. The ISRO Telemetry Tracking and Command Network, Bangalore, is interested in providing tracking support for all the satellite and launch vehicle missions. Then there are a number of research and educational institutions which provide design, development, and capacity building support to ISRO, such as the Vikram Sarabhai Space Application Center at Thiruvananthapuram, the Liquid Propulsion System Center at Trivandrum, Space Application Center at Ahmedabad, amongst many others. The Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, that is IIRS at Dehradun, is a premier institute for capacity building in remote sensing through postgraduate programs. Now, in addition, what is not indicated on this slide are two defense-related establishments which have been created over the last couple of years. In June 2010, India established an integrated space cell within the Integrated Defense Headquarters, which is essentially the armed forces, to look after defense-specific space requirements. Soon thereafter, there was a Naresh Chandra task force set up in 2011 to revisit the recommendations of the Kargil Review Committee. The Kargil Review Committee itself was instituted after Kargil, which recommended the creation of an aerospace command. The DSA, the Defense Space Agency, is a downsized version of the Aerospace Command and was approved by the Prime Minister in 2018. The Defense Imagery Processing and Analysis Center, which has been in existence for quite some time, also called as DIPAC in Delhi, and the Defense Satellite Control Center, this is the same as the Master Control Facility in Bhopal, which I just talked about. These two have been subsumed by the DSA. The DSA is headquartered in Bangalore and is manned by about 200 personnel from all over the three services of the Indian Armed Forces. At least they're supposed to be manned. I hope it's recently been set up. I'm not too sure whether all 200 are already there. Its charter is to operate systems for protecting Indian interests in outer space and to deal with potential space wars. The agency also has the responsibility of developing a space warfare strategy. The Defense Space Research Agency, the DSRA, is a sister organization. It's a scientific organization responsible for developing space warfare systems and technologies for the DSA. The DSRA was approved by the government in June 2019 and it is composed of scientists who undertake research and development in close coordination with the armed forces. Various types of anti-satellite weapon systems are currently under development. So having seen these two defense-related organizations, it's now the right time to switch to the next and an important facet, the militarization of space. This is what the Space Commission comprises of. You can see that Chairman ISRO, Dr. Sivan, you must have seen him somewhere or the other. He's also the Secretary of the Department of Space. Then you have the Principal Secretary of the Prime Minister, you have the National Security Advisor, the Cabinet Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, and other esteemed members. There are a couple of members which I have not shown, including the Secretary to this Commission. It's a joint secretary level appointment. So coming to militarization of space. From a security perspective, an increasing number of countries are relying on space to enhance their military capabilities and national security. by developing counter-space capabilities that can be used to provide them military advantages in this new war-fighting domain. I mentioned earlier it is one of the 5 recognized war-fighting domains today. I will now give you an insight into the nature of counter-space capabilities which are being pursued globally, the expertise achieved by major world powers, and finally the Indian perspective and capability status in this area. Counter-space capabilities. Counter-space capabilities are 4 types: kinetic physical counter-space weapons, non-kinetic physical counter-space weapons, both are physical, and then you have electronic and cyber counter-space weapons. Firstly, we'll look at kinetic physical counter-space weapons. These are weapons which attempt to strike directly or detonate a warhead near a satellite or ground station. The 3 main forms of kinetic physical attack are direct ascent ASAT weapons, ASAT for anti-satellite, co-orbital ASAT weapons, and ground station attacks. Direct ascent or DA ASAT weapons are launched on Earth to strike a satellite in orbit. It is launched on a suborbital path, while co-orbital ASAT weapons are first put into orbit and then later maneuvered into or near their intended target. Attacks on ground stations are target sites responsible for command and control of satellites. That should be obvious. Kinetic physical attacks tend to cause irreversible damage to the systems affected and demonstrate a strong show of force that would likely be attributable and publicly visible, which means there are going to be repercussions of this. A successful kinetic physical attack in space produces orbital debris which can be indiscriminately affect other satellites in similar orbits. 4 countries, namely the United States, Russia, China, and India, have successfully tested DA ASAT weapons. India did it in 2019, March 2019, as you must be knowing. Now, non-kinetic physical counter-space weapons. Now, these are weapons which have physical effects on satellites or ground systems without making physical contact. Lasers is an example, is one type which can be used to temporarily dazzle or permanently blind the sensors on satellites. The next category is high-powered microwave (HPM) weapons, which can disrupt the satellite's electronics or cause permanent damage to its electronic circuits. A nuclear device detonated in space, this is the third category, can create an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, that would have indiscriminate effects on satellites in orbit. These attacks operate at the speed of light and thus are more difficult to attribute. Attributable is a big thing in counter-space weapons. Satellites and HPM, hyper microwave weapons, may be mounted on ground, ship or airborne platforms as also on other satellites. A laser can be effective against a sensor on a satellite if it is within the field of view of the sensor, making it possible to attribute the attack to its approximate geographical origin. Why? Because the field of view of an optical sensor is very narrow, and so it is possible to attribute it to a physical geographical location. HPM attacks can be more difficult to attribute because the attack can come from a variety of angles, including from other satellites passing by in orbit. The use of a nuclear weapon in space would likely be attributable and publicly visible. Of course, the detonation of nuclear weapons in space is banned under the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963. Coming to the next category, electronic counter-space weapons. These are weapons which target the usage of the electromagnetic spectrum for data transmission through jamming. An uplink jammer interferes with the signal going from Earth to a satellite, while a downlink jammer targets the signal from the satellite to users on Earth. But remember, when we are saying jamming, it is always the receiver which is jammed, not the transmitter, and obviously you can't directly target the electromagnetic wave. Spoofing is a form of electronic attack where the attacker tricks the receiver into believing that a fake signal produced by the attacker is the real signal. A spoofer can be used to inject false information into a data stream or could even issue false commands to a satellite. Electronic forms of attacks can be difficult to detect or distinguish from accidental interference, making attribution difficult. Both jamming and spoofing are reversible forms of attack because once they are turned off, communications can return to normal. The technology needed to jam and spoof is commercially available and inexpensive, at least in most cases. Some sophisticated technologies are not so easily available, making it relatively easy to proliferate among state and non-state actors. Finally, cyber weapons. Cyber attacks target the data itself, not the electronics. It targets the data itself and the systems that use, transmit, and control the flow of data. These targets can target ground stations, end user equipment, or the satellites themselves. While cyber attacks require a high degree of understanding of the systems being targeted, they do not necessarily require significant resources to conduct. The barrier to entry is therefore relatively low, and cyber attacks can be contracted out to private groups or individuals. Accurate and timely attribution of a cyber attack can be very difficult because attackers can use a variety of methods to conceal their identities. In fact, this is the most difficult to attribute, cyber attacks. Now, having seen the types of counter space capabilities, let's look at what the major global powers are doing for counter space capabilities. What are the capabilities? Firstly, the United States. The US has conducted multiple tests for something called Rendezvous on Proximity Operations, RPO, in both LEO and GEO that could lead to co-orbital ASAP capability. Rendezvous and proximity, if you can figure out, is basically putting something in orbit and then making it rendezvous with a target and carrying on proximity operations by disturbing the target in some manner. That's what is RPO. It is operational mid-course missile defense interceptors that have been demonstrated in an ASAP role against low LEO satellites. Now, missile defense interceptors is a technology, even India uses such a technology, which can be repurposed for an ASAP role, because essentially you are doing similar thing, targeting a moving object in the lower space areas. The US has an operational electronic warfare EW offensive counter space system, which is deployed globally to provide uplink jamming capability against geostationary communication satellites. It is also the capability to jam global navigation satellites, all of these GPS, GLONASS, BeiDou, within a local area of operation. Over the past several decades, the US has conducted significant R&D on the use of ground-based high-energy lasers for counter space and other purposes. It has evolved doctrine and policy on counter space capabilities over several decades, although not always publicly expressed. Its setting up of the Space Force in 2019 demonstrates the determination of the US to maintain its domination in this new warfighting domain. Next, China. There is strong evidence to indicate that China is making a sustained effort to develop a broad range of counter space capabilities. Like the US, it has conducted multiple tests of technologies for RPO in both LEO and GEO that could lead to co-orbital ASAP capability. China dramatically demonstrated the direct ascent capability in 2007 by destroying a satellite in polar orbit at an altitude of 865 kilometers. China likely has significant electronic warfare counter space capabilities against navigation and communication satellites, and is also assessed to be developing direct energy weapon systems, DEW, which cover both laser and hypermicrowave for counter space use. Setting up of the Space Segment Department under the newly raised PLA Strategic Force, which was raised in 2015, is a major organizational transformation carried out by China towards militarization of space. Finally, Russia. There are strong indicators that Russia has been testing technologies for RPO in both LEO and GEO, especially over the last couple of years. It is almost certainly capable of some limited DA ASAT operations, direct ascent ASAT operations. Russia has operational experience in the use of counter space electronic warfare capabilities from recent military campaigns in Syria and elsewhere. Russian ground-based satellite laser ranging facilities could be used to dazzle sensors of optical imagery satellites. The Russian Space Forces are a branch of the Russian Aerospace Forces, which are chartered to defend the space assets, secure these assets, its interests in this domain. Now coming to India, India's space security. Policy and organization. Now, India's traditional approach to outer space emphasized non-militarization of space, However, this began to change in the early 2000s, driven by the evolving security threats that India faced, especially in relation to Pakistan and China. Pakistan acquisition of ballistic missiles led to India to pursue ballistic missile defenses, which in turn helped it in its ASAT capabilities. In addition, China's first successful ASAT test in January 2000 suddenly made India's space assets vulnerable. As a result, India is beginning to have a much more determined approach on how it wants to protect its space assets and develop its own ASAT capability as a deterrent. Some concrete actions have been taken by India to integrate its space program more fully with the military. I have already talked about the integrated space cell now upgraded to the DSA and the DSRA. In a first, India conducted a space security tabletop war game called IntSpace X in July 2019, which was attended by stakeholders from the military and scientific establishment. The Ministry of Home Affairs has also established the Space and Technology Cell to monitor border areas to check for intrusion from Pakistan and China. And Pakistan's expanding nuclear weapons program has also prompted India to develop suitable space-based assets for surveillance of Pakistan's nuclear forces. The growing competition with China is leading to greater cooperation between India and a number of space powers in the Indo-Pacific such as Japan, Australia, and even France, all of whom feel threatened by China. These partnerships are likely to gather greater momentum given the recent aggressive stance adopted by China in its neighborhood and beyond. India currently has, what are India's space assets? Okay, we'll come to the counter space weapons. India currently has 15 operational remote control satellites which can be used for civil as well as military purposes. I'll cut short this a little bit because we are running short of time. The Indian Navy has got a dedicated GSAT-7 satellite for real-time communications amongst its warships, submarines, and aircraft and land systems. Similarly, there is a GSAT-7A, which is shared 70-30 between the Air Force and Army. It's called the Angry Bird. It was launched in December 2018. There was a GSAT-6A also, which was launched in 2018 for the Indian Armed Forces, but communications with it were lost before it reached orbit. There's a GSAT-32 which is planned as its replacement. So as of now, there are two main satellites, 7 and 7A, in addition to a number of others which are meant for remote sensing. There's an electromagnetic intelligence gathering satellite, EMISAT, which was launched in April 2019, specifically for the Indian Armed Forces to detect. It's a electronic intelligence satellite, as the name suggests, to detect enemy radar signatures. In all, India has 14 satellites with military applications. And now a brief overview of India's counter-space weapons. Kinetic physical. As I said, India conducted a successful DA ASAT test in March 2019, and as per Chairman DRDO, while this test was conducted at a low altitude to limit space debris, the missile system used in the test was capable of reaching most satellites in LEO. He also stated that India is working on technologies related to co-orbital weapons. Non-kinetic physical. In late 2020, again Chairman DRDO announced a program for development of high energy lasers and high power microwaves which could be adapted as counter space weapons. India reportedly has two laser-based weapon systems capable of striking short-range aerial targets such as drones by jamming command and control links. As far as electronic weapons are concerned, basically we have a Samyukta electronic warfare system which is capable of jamming communications and radar signals over a wide range of frequencies. And the latest is Himshakti, which is supposed to be the most powerful Indian EW system in its arsenal today, capable of jamming frequencies over 10,000 square kilometers. India reportedly jammed Pakistani radars and communications during the 2019 airstrike. Cyber. As India's cyber capabilities grow, the most frequent targets are the governments of Pakistan and China. However, there is no evidence to indicate that India has tested its or employed its cyber capabilities against space systems. So coming to this aspect of commercialization of space, this is actually a very important activity aspect, and transformative steps are being taken, as was indicated by me earlier also in the talk, by setting up of new agencies like NSIL and InSpace. So I'll just give a very brief overview. In India, space activities have as in other space agencies also, driven by the government to meet national needs with high focus on self-reliance and security. Commercial activities till recently were driven by ISRO through its commercial arm, Antriksh, which was set up in early 90s and closely regulated and controlled by the Department of Space. However, with the setting up of the NSIL, the New Space India Limited, and InSpace E, commercial activities are bound to get a fillip, which today account for merely 2% of the $360 billion global space economy. This I brought out at the outset itself. This is intended to be achieved by incentivizing private players to participate across the space value chain. Now, ISRO is currently working to bring in more private industry participation in both launch systems as well as satellite manufacturing. In order to build capacity and reach its designated targets and goals, India has a large base of small and medium scale enterprises known as SMEs involved in supplying parts and components of satellite and launch vehicle manufacturing, which are continuously being contracted by ISRO for meeting its demands. Over the last 4 decades, an ecosystem 500 Indian companies has been developed. As per ISRO, 80% of the PSLV production is outsourced to private industry, while in the case of major satellite missions such as Mars Orbiter mission, over 120 companies contributed to manufacturing. In recent times, ISRO has adopted public-private partnership policies to encourage companies to take up more production activities rather than being merely part of the component manufacturers. ISRO has also built a facility spread over 25 acres in Bangalore where the amenities have been set up for use by the industry. Now, as already brought out, while Antriksh handles ISRO's commercial deals for satellites and launch vehicles with foreign customers, the focus being foreign customers, NSIL is started to deal with capacity building of local industry for space manufacturing. Although there is a considerable overlap in the functions of these two public sector entities, and there's still a little bit of a confusion as to who's supposed to do what. InSpace E has been set up to act as a single point interface between ISRO and everyone and anyone who wants to participate in space related activities by regulating. So it regulates space activities and facilitating usage of ISRO facilities by the non-government private entities. It will also handhold and guide the private industry in space activities through incentives and a friendly regulatory environment. The government has also released a draft Spacecom policy 2020 in late last year, October last year, which seeks to foster, now this is a space communication policy, not an overall space policy, which seeks to foster promotion of the Indian industry as a co-traveler along with the Department of Space towards meeting the growing demands of space-based communications. With these incentives, private industry, including startups in the country, should be able to leapfrog by piggybacking on 5 decades of experience and expertise gathered by ISRO and come up with offerings that complement the efforts of ISRO, leaving ISRO to focus on cutting edge strategic technologies which is required to focus on. This would empower them, the private industry, to integrate into the global space supply chain and compete internationally. Now that is the objective. I hope you have found this exposure useful. If you have any questions, I've given you several.